So tonight's Bible reading comes from Luke chapter 10, verses 38 to 42. Now, as they went on their way, Jesus entered a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed him as a guest. She had a sister named Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to what he said. But Martha was distracted with all the preparations she had to make, so she came up to him and said, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do all the work alone? Tell her to help me." Please help this clicker. But the Lord answered her, "Martha, Martha, you are worried and troubled about many things, but one thing is needed. Mary has chosen the best part. It will not be taken away from her."
It was very obvious in the feedback meeting that we need a new clicker. So we're going to get a new clicker. I'm Denise. For those of you who haven't met me, I'm the pastor here. Looking forward to meeting you if you want to hang around afterwards. Sure, we go to GYG, but we also actually have supper just beforehand, so knock yourself out. For the past 3 weeks, we have been considering our big year theme of loving our neighbour, and we've been using Jesus' parable of the Good Samaritan to do that. And 3 weeks ago, you might remember, we discovered that far from being a story that leaves us feeling kind of warm and fuzzy, it's actually a story that leaves us feeling kicked in the guts as we come face to face with our reaction to the idea that someone we despise could turn out to be a neighbour who stops to help us. We don't want to hear that. Our shock at that idea kind of reveals this self-righteousness that we all have lurking within us. We could be a good neighbour, but that person definitely could not be a good neighbour. So that's a challenge there. 2 weeks ago, we saw that loving our neighbour is actually in our own best interests, as well as in the interests of our neighbour. And this is true on a personal level. I got to know my neighbours, and that's helpful for me when I need a dog sitter. And also on a global level, foreign aid and working to reduce global inequities make for a more peaceful world. So loving your neighbour isn't just something virtuous that we should do, it's also just common sense wisdom. And last week we heard all sorts of neighbour stories from Kenny and Grace and Matthew, and thank you so much for sharing those. I heard them online and they were great. Now, for a Bible nerd like me, it is very interesting that Luke has placed the story of Mary and Martha immediately after Jesus telling that parable of the Good Samaritan. If you look in your Bibles, it's the very next thing that happens. Both stories are about loving your neighbour. Both are about hospitality that's shown to a neighbour. But it seems like loving your neighbour doesn't look the same in every circumstance. The Samaritan came across a neighbour in great need and swung into action. He bandaged his neighbour's wounds, took him to an inn, paid for his stay there, swung into action. And in this story, we see Martha swinging into action to help her neighbour too. She invites Jesus as a guest into her house. She busily prepares food while her lazy sister sat around listening to Jesus' stories. But instead of commending Martha, Jesus put the brakes on her efforts and said it was actually Martha's sister Mary who got it right. So after telling the lawyer, go and do, he tells Martha, stop doing, sit down and listen. Sometimes when we think we're helping our neighbour, when we have the very best intentions of helping out, where we might not be helping our neighbour. And in fact, it's possible that we're even harming our neighbour. Years ago, I had a friend stay with us for the weekend. It was a long time ago. And I was really looking forward to spending some time with this friend. And she was very intent on helping me with everything. Well, I went out to run some errands, and when I came home, she'd done my washing. Now, as it was raining, she threw everything in the dryer. My favourite purple shorts. My most favourite shorts. I wore them all the time. They'd shrunk. They were all misshapen. I almost cried. I really, really loved those shorts. I knew her intentions were good. I knew that. I just wish she hadn't tried to help, because I didn't need her to do my washing. I didn't want her to do my washing. I really just wanted to sit and chat with her, and find out how things are going in her life. That was 35 years ago. I still miss those shorts. Maybe I need to talk to somebody about that. I don't know. I don't know what that says about me. Anyway, sometimes, you can see, you've had things like that happen to you. Sometimes when we try to help our neighbour, we unintentionally harm our neighbour. It happens when we don't sit and listen. It happens when we assume that we know what's needed, but we don't truly understand the situation. It happens when we take away our neighbour's autonomy, their ability to make decisions for themselves. One of the most stunning examples of this is orphanages set up to help AIDS orphans in many African and Asian countries. With the very best of intentions, Western organisations, frequently with a Christian ethos and financially backed by Western churches, rushed in to help the tens of thousands of children orphaned when their parents died from AIDS in the late 1980s and onwards. And there is no doubt they surely needed help. And so funds were put into buildings where these precious kids could be housed, and staff were employed who could take care of them. And short-term mission trips were organised. Churches sent teams of people to build and renovate orphanages, and if you weren't handy with a hammer, you could spend the week holding babies and playing with children, because those kids, they needed love and attention. They needed to be held. They needed physical touch. And so teams swung into action. They raised funds. They gave up their annual leave. They worked tirelessly. They were motivated, no doubt, by the parable of the Good Samaritan. And they went home happy because they felt good. They'd made a difference in the world. They'd made a difference to children. And knowing they went home happy because they knew they'd poured love into a baby by holding them for 2 hours every afternoon for a week. Do you know, it took almost 2 decades for the evidence to emerge that these well-intentioned orphanages were doing terrible harm to children. As children grew up and left the orphanage, they just failed to thrive in life. They had no social network outside of their orphanage, so they had no friendship group outside that either. They didn't have contacts in their communities to get jobs. They hadn't picked up the street sense that they needed to avoid exploitative relationships. They didn't know how to behave socially. Their stay in an orphanage had actually made them outsiders to their community. They felt like they didn't belong. It also deeply harmed their psychological health, having a revolving door of caregivers when they were babies. Hundreds of people on short-term missions, holding them, showing deep love and affection for a week, and then leaving them. And that had left them with a fear of abandonment and no sense of personal boundaries. And that is a recipe for getting into abusive, dysfunctional relationships as adults. Orphanages ruined their futures. And that was in the orphanages that were really well run. And this might be hard to hear because some of us may have been involved in those very short-term mission trips. And I acknowledge that. those orphanages that were well run, we can already see some of the harm that was done. But when it became clear that Westerners would pay to come and visit orphanages and donate lots of money, unscrupulous operators moved in and began paying parents to borrow their babies and small children so that Western tourists could spend the morning cuddling babies before their afternoon safari tour. Some were even bussed from orphanage to orphanage, and this goes on today. It's become a lucrative business. And if you go to Australia's Smart Traveller website, you will see there a post discouraging people from volunteering in orphanages because of the known harms. Orphanage voluntourism. Westerners who hear about, on the one hand, a 15-year-old kid caring for 4 younger siblings in a one-room dwelling with dirt floors, no running water and not enough food, there's what we've got on the one hand. And on the other hand, 20 kids living in a newly built, well-kept building with hot and cold running water, nutritious food, cooked by paid staff. Well, which would you think is going to be the best? Most of us, I think, would make the assumption that the second is better than the first. But we haven't sat and listened. And we impose our Western assumptions onto a culture and an issue that we really don't understand fully. Aid organisations who work in this space, the ones who have sat and listened, the ones who have taken notice of the research and the outcomes, they're slowly changing direction. They're beginning to close down their orphanages. Money, which is still very much needed, is now spent on tracing relatives who maybe live just in the next community, but they didn't realise their second cousin died, leaving a baby daughter, because the communication pathways are so poor. And of course they would embrace that child in their family. Money is spent on finding ways to support older siblings to continue to care for their younger siblings. Maybe things like rent assistance until their older sibling has finished schooling and managed to find a job. If there are no relatives to be found who can care for a child, the very last resort is not an orphanage. It's to find and support a local family to care for the child. The outcomes are far, far better, even when the kids continue to live below the poverty line. Great intentions, devastating impact. When helping your neighbour, I think I had a photo. When helping your neighbour doesn't help your neighbour, you're not helping your neighbour. And that can be really hard to swallow. Helping without harming our neighbour doesn't just apply to international development, it applies to our own personal interactions with people every day. We want to help people who need help. We especially want to help the people that we love. We see them making decisions that we think aren't in their best interests, and we want to help. We see our loved ones in hard situations, and we want to save them from the pain of those situations. Can everybody feel my pain up here? Is everybody, on board with this? Because this is something that I struggle with. How can we help our neighbour while being confident that we're not harming our neighbour in the process? Because the last thing that we want to do is to be stuck in paralysis by analysis, so afraid that we might do harm that we actually don't do anything at all. We don't want to go there. I'm not a psychologist, and I have no qualifications in international development, and so you're going to have to use some healthy scepticism to evaluate this next bit, okay? I have 2 questions that I've found helpful when I find myself helping a neighbour. The first one is, am I feeling frustrated with my neighbour? I love frustration. The presence of frustration is a lovely red flag to pay attention to. It is such a helpful emotion. None of us act with 100% altruistic motivations. We've all got flaws, and we've all got a personal history that can blind us to our real motivations. But frustration, so helpful, it's usually a sign that you're not getting what you want. If you're helping someone and you're finding yourself constantly frustrated with them, you might want to ask yourself, am I frustrated that they're not doing what I want? That they're not meeting my expectations, my goals for them? And if that's the case, then think carefully. Who am I doing this for? Am I doing this for them or for me? This stuff is really hard because sometimes we really do know what's good for someone. Healthy eating is always good for kids. But can you force a piece of broccoli down the throat of a 2-year-old? No, you cannot. It just doesn't work. All you can do is offer it and respectfully honour their choice to eat it or not eat it. Which brings me to the second helpful question. Am I trampling on my neighbour's autonomy? Am I doing something for them that they could do for themselves? Am I robbing someone of an opportunity to grow through difficulty? Oddly, I've found guidelines around disaster relief really helpful in this space. I know that sounds weird, but it's helped me to figure out when to step in and when to step back when I'm considering how to help my neighbour, whether that neighbour is a friend who's in a tough spot or a flood-affected community that I'm thinking about donating to. Because disaster relief agencies understand that there are 3 stages of help when a disaster hits. The first one is relief. People need relief. People are in crisis. They're in disarray. They're in shock. They're unable to process what just happened. They need someone to do things for them because they can't do those things for themselves. They're unable to do things for themselves. And in the relief stage, help looks like giving food, shelter, clothing, money, medical aid, access to social workers and counselling, and giving it immediately, as fast as possible. In a natural disaster, the relief stage only lasts days, sometimes maybe weeks in a really major crisis. So relief is immediate and it's temporary. This is what the Good Samaritan did, isn't it? For the injured man. He did what the man needed and couldn't do for himself. He took control of the situation because the injured man was in no state to take control of his own life. Assistance after a disaster, though, should move as quickly as possible into the second stage, and that's recovery or rehabilitation. It's a longer stage, and it, in disaster zones, consists of things like reconstructing the physical infrastructure, finding ways of restoring emotional, social, economic, physical well-being to the people affected. And unlike the relief stage, this second stage, it must involve the people affected. It's not working for the victims of a disaster, it's working with them. It's about helping the community to find their feet, to work together, to take charge back of their lives. It's not about imposing your situations on the community. It's about restoring the community's sense of agency, a sense of hope in their ability to get through this. It's resisting the temptation to do something for someone when they're capable of doing it for themselves. I'm not talking about kindly making somebody a cup of tea, by the way. You know what I'm talking about. See, if this shift from relief to recovery doesn't happen, victims stay victims instead of becoming survivors. Because people need autonomy. It's a basic human need. You take it away from people and they don't do well. People need a sense of control over their lives. That's why prison is such a devastating thing. Recovery is the process of handing back control from the ones who came to help to the ones who needed help. And if we fail to do that, then we're not helping. We are harming our neighbour. The third stage is development. It's the ongoing process of making things better. And it's about the community deciding together how to prevent or mitigate against future disasters. And the role of an outside helper in that stage is to get out of the way so that the community can make decisions for themselves. The outside neighbour becomes a resource to the community. There, if the community decides they want to reach out and access that person's expertise, whatever it might be. It's not a leader who's actively directing the community. Anyway, I've found these 3 stages of disaster relief really quite helpful to keep in mind when I'm helping my neighbour. Does the person need immediate help because they're in crisis and they're unable to help themselves? Well, that's kind of a stage 1 thing. They need immediate and temporary help. Does this person need a sounding board? Not a solution from me, but someone to just bounce around possible options for how they can move through the challenges that they're facing. Maybe they just need someone to listen. Is this person coming to me as a resource person because I have a particular expertise that they need, like, I don't know, translating biblical Greek or something like that? Or maybe a referral to someone who has expertise in what they need. I think that unintentionally harming our neighbour is a particular danger for those of us who are in the helping professions. The teachers, the doctors, the social workers, the psychologists, the nurses, the allied health professionals. And I think it's a danger for parents as well. It is a danger for me. And I've been struggling to work this stuff out for years. Some of you can attest to that. I'm a parent and I'm a pastor. And I think both of those realms, can be really, really tricky. People like, all those people that I mentioned, we went into these helping professions because we care about people. And that care can very easily stray into doing for others what they can do for themselves, into unintentionally stepping across other people's personal boundaries, unintentionally robbing people of their agency and their autonomy. And often we operate out of a deficit in ourselves, some unrecognised need that we have for fixing people, for controlling outcomes, for being a saviour. We do really well if we can recognise that within us. Unintentionally harming our neighbour, I think, is also a particular danger for those of us who are very passionate about social justice issues. And I know that's lots of us here. We rightly want to stand up for people who are trapped in a system or who are being harmed by policies that are harming them. And so we should. We should be doing that. Don't hold back. And yet, unless we've worked in that space or had lived experience with that issue, we need to have a healthy dose of humility to know that we might not have the right answers. We can stand up for people, but solutions to social issues are rarely simple. If they were, I guess they'd be solved pretty easily. We need people who can do the hard work of looking at the outcomes of various approaches, who understand human psychology and sociology and economics and all of that stuff. And for those of us who don't have the expertise to come up with good policies and well-informed good interventions, sitting and listening is always going to help our neighbour. There's rarely a time when that is not going to be helpful. So we can't go wrong with simply taking the time to listen. The theme for April, you'll be wondering, why are we still on loving your neighbour? Because is it not April, Denise? And have we not moved on to the next theme? I hope you'll forgive me for taking an extra week on love your neighbour. This month's theme is be humble. And I think you can see how much overlap there is between that theme and this theme of helping our neighbour without harming our neighbour. So, I'm happy to throw our schedule out. Edwin is speaking next week, and he is going to be speaking on the theme of being humble, and I really look forward to what he has to say on that topic, because Edwin is a very humble person. One last thing, I asked Annie a couple of weeks ago if she knew of some videos on the topic of loving your neighbour without harming your neighbour, from a philosophy perspective, because that's her thing. And she's given me 2 short videos. They're really, really good. One on like Kierkegaard, but it's really simple. I understood it. And another one on theories about what needs to happen with love and how those things can prevent harm to the people that we love. So I'm going to stick those on Slack. What if you're not on Slack? I guess I could put a link or something in next week's newsletter. But anyway, I will put them on Slack for anyone to check out. So I hope that you will find those helpful as well. Oh, look, there they are. Those 2. In fact, seriously, that bottom, they're both really, really good. And the top left one, I'm not good with lefts and rights, the top left one is very related to what I've been saying tonight. The bottom right one, you just got to see it. That's all I'm saying.